Chapter 22, Hidden Temple, Part 3. The air inside the hidden temple was thick with the weight of ancient magic. As the party moved further into the dark depths, the chanting grew louder, echoing off the stone walls, reverberating through the very heart of the mountain. The voices were low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like a deep hum that tugged at their minds. It was as though the earth itself was speaking to them, beckoning them closer to whatever awaited at the temple's core. Grimbar's hands were bound tight behind his back, his arms stiff from the strain. He was visibly tense, every muscle coiled in discomfort and distrust. He had been quiet since Torgar had forced him along, but the weight of the situation was becoming palpable. His eyes flicked nervously from side to side, taking in the ancient carvings that lined the temple walls, symbols he knew all too well, the sacred emblems of the cult of the Sent Ones. Torgar, with his usual commanding presence, was undeterred, pushing Grimbar forward with a firm hand on his back, urging him to follow. "Move, Stonefist," he grunted. "This is your fate." Grimbar muttered under his breath, but didn't resist. There was no point in trying to fight the inevitable. They passed through narrow stone passages, their footsteps echoing in the darkness until they reached a large domed chamber. The ceiling soared above them, carved from the mountain's bedrock with intricate runes and symbols. The walls were covered in ancient pictoglyphs, a silent story etched into the very stone. At the center of the room, a group of cultists were kneeling, chanting in unison, their heads bowed in reverence. The flickering light of torches cast long shadows across the room, making the runes on the walls seem to dance and shift. Torgar stepped forward with a solemn expression, his voice rising above the chants. "Behold, the legendary Sent Ones have returned," he declared. His tone was filled with both pride and awe. "The prophecy is fulfilled." The cultists paused in their prayers, looking up, their eyes widening as they saw Lucas and Mina. Murmurs rippled through the gathered group. Some seemed to hesitate, doubt clouding their expressions. Others looked on with eager anticipation, as though expecting miracles. Torgar didn't wait for their response. "These two are the ones spoken of in the ancient texts, the ones who will bring balance to the world, the ones who will lead us to the next age." His eyes shone with fervor as he motioned to the pictoglyphs on the wall. "They've always been with us," Torgar continued, pointing to a specific image on the wall. "This story told over generations. The Sent Ones, born of the earth and sky, destined to return in times of great need. See here?" He gestured to the depiction of two figures, standing tall amidst a scene of destruction and rebirth. "This is them, the first Sent Ones, before their powers were sealed away." The cultists leaned forward, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some whispered among themselves, as though Torgar's words were too grandiose, too fantastic to be true. "How could they be? The Ones," one muttered. "They look nothing like." "They are them," Torgar interrupted firmly. "The prophecy is clear. The Sent Ones are not of this world. They walk among us as mere mortals, hidden in plain sight until the time comes." Mina stood straighter, a determined gleam in her eyes. "What do you want us to do, Torgar?" Torgar's expression shifted, turning from reverence to something more demanding. "Prove yourselves," he said, his gaze now locked on Lucas and Mina. "Show us the powers of the Sent Ones. Show us what you are capable of." Mina didn't hesitate. A mischievous grin spread across her face as she nodded, moving to the center of the room. Her body coiled, then she sprang into action, faster than the eye could follow. She leaped into the air, twisting and flipping, her movements fluid and graceful, enhanced by her abilities. With a burst of speed, she vaulted across the room, twisting through the air as though gravity had no hold on her. She landed in a crouch with a final, dramatic flourish, a wild spark of energy crackling around her like an electric storm. The cultists gasped, some even stepping back in fear and awe. The impossible had just been made real before their very eyes. Torgar nodded in approval, his gaze never leaving her. "See? Power," he said. "Power beyond anything we've known." Mina stood up, catching her breath, a proud grin on her face. She had always loved the thrill of pushing her limits, and the look of astonishment on the cultists' faces was just what she needed. But Lucas stood back, a sense of unease creeping over him. He wasn't sure if he was ready to show his powers, especially not in front of strangers, especially not in front of these people. He glanced at Mina, who was still basking in the attention, and then back at Torgar, who was already expecting him to perform. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his chest. His powers were still so raw, so unpredictable. What if he lost control? What if... "I will not perform on command," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. Torgar's expression hardened, but there was no trace of surprise in his eyes. He had known Lucas's hesitation. "Very well," he said, his voice low. "We shall proceed with the judgment." He turned to the cultists, gesturing toward Grimbar. "As for the Stonefist, his fate has been sealed. We shall see if he is worthy to stand amongst us." Grimbar's jaw tightened. He didn't speak, but the weight of the situation hung over him like a storm cloud. The cultists moved into position around Grimbar, their expressions grim as they began to chant in unison once more, their voices rising in an eerie, unified call. Grimbar's eyes narrowed, and though his hands were bound, there was a fire in them. He would not go down without a fight. The judgment had begun, and there was no turning back now. The flickering torches cast long shadows, stretching like twisted fingers across the stone floor of the domed room. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the cultists assembled in a semicircle around Grimbar, their faces unreadable, their hands clasped in reverence. The chanting had died down, replaced by an eerie silence as the moment of judgment approached. Torgar stood at the forefront, his broad frame towering over Grimbar, who was still bound and kneeling in the center. His hands remained tied, his expression a mix of defiance and resignation. The cold stone beneath him seemed to seep into his bones as he locked eyes with the cultists, unwilling to show weakness, but equally unwilling to back down. "Grimbar Stonefist," Torgar began, his voice heavy with accusation, "you stand before the cult of the Sent Ones, having once been one of us. But your actions have betrayed your oath. You sought to kill Lucas, one of the Sent Ones, and have consorted with those who oppose the very foundations of our faith." The cultists murmured among themselves, their expressions a blend of suspicion and disbelief. A few glared at Grimbar, their eyes hardening with judgment. "I do not deny it," Grimbar's voice rang out, steady despite the tension in the air. He lifted his chin defiantly, eyes never wavering from Torgar's. "I have tried to stop the prophecy from coming true. These Sent Ones, they bring nothing but chaos. Your beliefs are misguided. You are blind to the truth." Torgar's lips curled into a sneer, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the assembled cultists. "His actions have endangered our cause. He has allied himself with the cult of the Unbound, the very enemies of the Sent Ones. You have all heard the rumors. The cult of the Unbound seeks to undo what the Sent Ones have built. They are the true threat." Grimbar's gaze flickered for just a moment, but he said nothing more. Lucas stood quietly at the edge of the room, his eyes scanning the crowd. He could feel the weight of their thoughts, their minds buzzing with questions, doubt, and conviction. He reached out, subtly extending his telepathic senses, listening to the whispers that fluttered through their thoughts. What does Grimbar know about the Unbound? Can we trust him? He's lying. He's always been a traitor. What if Torgar is wrong? What if he's been manipulated by the Unbound too? The conflicting thoughts swirled around him like a storm, but Lucas focused, pushing deeper into Grimbar's mind. The Stonefist was struggling. His thoughts were fragmented, filled with anger and betrayal, but there were snippets of truth buried beneath the surface. The cult of the Unbound, they had a leader, a figure who was as dangerous as he was enigmatic. Lucas sifted through the chaos, pulling out the names and places buried deep within Grimbar's mind. He could hear the name of their leader clearly, Thranor Blackstone, a name whispered in fear among the dwarves. There was more. Grimbar had been part of a plot, a faction within the dwarven mountain capital itself. The cult of the Unbound had its headquarters in a secretive location known only to a few, buried deep inside the dwarven mountains. The place was called Stone's Hollow, a hidden enclave beneath the city of Brumkorath, one of the mountain's oldest and most secretive districts. The information hit Lucas like a sudden wave, and he pulled back, trying to stay grounded. He couldn't risk revealing everything. He glanced over at Thomas, whose eyes were wide as he took in the bizarre spectacle unfolding before him. Thomas had been silent up until now, but his expression said everything. He was clearly trying to process what he was seeing, the surrealism of it all. A cult, prophecies, and now Grimbar, the one-time ally, being judged by his own people. Thomas's gaze flicked toward Lucas, as if wondering how he was handling the situation. He wasn't the only one who was struggling to make sense of it. Mina, standing beside him, had noticed Lucas' intense focus, the way his brow furrowed as he seemed to reach into the minds of everyone in the room. She wasn't one to leave things unsaid, especially when it came to Lucas. Lucas, her voice echoed softly in his mind. Did you sense anything? Lucas hesitated, still caught between the lingering thoughts he had just encountered. There's a lot going on in their minds. Grimbar's hiding something. But there's a name, Thranor Blackstone. And the cult of the Unbound, they're hiding deep in Brumkorath, in a place called Stone's Hollow. Mina nodded, processing the information. But she didn't push him further. She knew Lucas would share what he felt was important. The cultists, meanwhile, were waiting for Grimbar to speak. But he remained silent, his eyes narrowed as he studied them, seemingly weighing his words carefully. Torgar gave him an impatient look. You are asked to speak, Grimbar, he said sharply. Tell us more of your allies. Who are the Unbound? Where are they hiding? Where is their base of operations? Grimbar's jaw tightened. He had no intention of revealing more. He knew that if he did, he'd be betraying the only people who still believed in his cause. I will say no more, he declared, his voice steady but filled with finality. The Unbound will remain hidden, just as you will remain blind. Your judgment means nothing. Torgar's eyes darkened with fury, but he did not speak. Instead, he turned to the cultists, raising his hand to silence the murmurs. The room was heavy with expectation as the cultists deliberated, their faces grim, their minds locked in focus. After what felt like an eternity, one of the elders, a woman with long silver hair and eyes like cold steel, stood and raised her voice. Grimbar Stonefist, you have betrayed the cult of the Sent Ones. You have sought to destroy one of our own and aligned yourself with those who would see our cause undone. Her eyes flickered toward Torgar. Your actions have brought shame upon this temple. There is only one judgment left. Banishment. Another voice chimed in from the back. He is to never return to these mountains. He is to be cast out as a traitor and left to face the consequences of his choices. The decision was unanimous. Grimbar's fate had been sealed. He would be cast out, never allowed to return to the Dwarven Mountains. Torgar stepped forward, his expression hard. So be it, he said coldly. You will leave, and you will never set foot here again. Grimbar didn't flinch. He simply met Torgar's gaze with a fire that refused to be extinguished, before he was led away, his future uncertain, and his mind still burning with the secrets he kept locked away. The chamber felt even colder now, the shadows stretching longer as the last echoes of Grimbar's departure faded into the stone walls. The cultists, still gathered in their semicircle, were murmuring among themselves, some casting curious glances at Lucas and Mina, while others spoke quietly with Torgar, asking questions or debating the judgment that had just taken place. Lucas stood motionless, his gaze locked on the spot where Grimbar had been kneeling moments before. The weight of everything that had transpired pressed down on him like an iron shackle, and though he hadn't spoken up, his thoughts were loud. Grimbar's secret, the one he had uncovered with his mind, still gnawed at him. There was more to this cult, more to the legends, but the pieces were scattered, incomplete. He couldn't trust Torgar. Not yet. Not with all this. But the cultists might hold the key to understanding the larger picture. He glanced over at Mina and Thomas, both standing nearby, their expressions a mix of confusion and unease. Mina's eyes, normally so focused, flickered with questions, while Thomas appeared as if he'd been thrust into an alien world, trying to grasp the surreal nature of it all. Breaking the silence, Lucas stepped forward. He turned to Torgar, who was still conversing with a couple of the more vocal cultists, his posture commanding despite the whispers that surrounded him. The atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer the tense silence of judgment, but an uneasy hum of people trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. Tell me more about the Sent Ones, Lucas said, his voice firm, though beneath it was the edge of uncertainty. The legends, the history, anything that can help me understand what the hell is going on here. Why are they so important? And why the secrecy? Torgar's conversation with the other cultists faltered. His eyes flicked toward Lucas, momentarily narrowing before he addressed him. His expression softened slightly, as though the question had surprised him. Perhaps because he hadn't expected such directness, or maybe because he wasn't sure how much he could reveal. He motioned for the others to quiet down, gesturing for them to give him a moment. Slowly, the murmurs died down, leaving only the distant flickering of torch flames in the air. "Very well," Torgar said, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "The cult of the Sent Ones is ancient, far older than most of our kind remembers. It's been around for centuries, longer than any of the kingdoms and cities you've seen. My mother told me stories of them when I was a child. She would speak of the Sent Ones as though they were legends, as though they were deities sent to save our people in times of great need." His eyes took on a faraway look as he spoke, and for a moment it almost seemed as if he were talking to himself. They were not just warriors, but heroes, figures of immense power who protected the dwarves from the disasters of the past, plagues, invaders, the great earthquake that shattered the land. They were there every time, always working in the shadows. It was only after their last great battle that they disappeared from our records. No one knows where they went. They became myths, stories told to children, whispered to us by our elders. Lucas took in the information, piecing it together as Torgar spoke. It sounded like the Sent Ones were more than just a cult. They were a force, a forgotten order with immense power that had shaped the dwarven history. Yet, the secrecy surrounding them only deepened the mystery. If they had been so influential, why were they kept hidden? Why was there no record of their final days? Torgar continued, his voice growing quieter as he seemed to reflect on the past. "We were taught from a young age to respect the tradition, to honor the Sent Ones. But no one really knew why we couldn't speak of them openly, why their stories were kept within these walls, as if the truth could shatter everything we thought we knew. My mother always said that the Sent Ones had a purpose that was greater than any of us could understand. She believed they would return when the time was right, when the world was ready for them. But she never told me why." He paused, then looked at Lucas directly, his gaze steady. "All I know is that, according to the ancient writings, the Sent Ones were not of this world. They came from beyond the stars. They weren't just any dwarves. They were something more. And that's why they're kept hidden. It's not just to protect us. It's because their power is dangerous." Lucas, still processing the weight of Torgar's words, glanced over at Mina and Thomas, both of whom had been listening intently. Thomas seemed on the verge of speaking, but Mina, always the more cautious one, spoke first. "Dangerous?" she echoed, her voice laced with skepticism. "If they were so powerful, why didn't they protect everyone from the disasters? Why were they so secretive?" Torgar's face darkened slightly at her question. "Because there are forces in this world that would misuse such power. They would bend it to their will and destroy everything in their path. My people have always known that. That's why the Sent Ones were hidden, so they could never be used as weapons of destruction. It wasn't that they didn't try to help. It's that the cost of their power is far greater than anyone realizes." Lucas took a step back, feeling the weight of the mystery closing in on him. He wasn't sure if he fully trusted Torgar, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The Sent Ones had been some kind of saviors, but their return wasn't a simple matter of revival. They had been lost for a reason, hidden for a reason. And whatever power Lucas and Mina had, it was bound to that history, whether they liked it or not. Torgar, sensing the tension in the air, gave a solemn nod. "I know this may seem overwhelming, but you must understand, the Sent Ones are not just legends. They are part of a greater cycle. When the time comes, their return will not be a blessing for all. It will change the world, and some will welcome it, while others will fight against it. You two," he gestured to Lucas and Mina, "are the key. That much is certain." The room fell silent as the weight of Torgar's words settled in. It was as if the temple itself held its breath, watching them, waiting for their next move. As the cultists began to speak among themselves again, murmuring their own questions and concerns to Torgar, Lucas stepped back, signaling to Mina and Thomas. The three of them retreated to the far side of the chamber, their voices low as they discussed what they had just learned. What the hell is all this? Thomas finally muttered, his face flushed with disbelief. Sent ones? Ancient cults? It's like we're trapped in some fantasy story. Mina crossed her arms, her gaze distant as she considered the implications. It's more than just a story, Thomas. Whatever this is, it's real. Torgar doesn't have all the answers, but there's something important here. Something we need to figure out. Lucas, who had been quiet for a moment, finally spoke. His voice was heavy, burdened with the weight of what he had just learned, and the secrets he was still holding on to. Grimbar's involved with an opposing cult, he said, his words quiet but certain. They're called the Cult of the Unbound. They're dangerous, more dangerous than I thought. But there's more. Grimbar's hiding something else. A location, something called Stone's Hollow, beneath Brumkorath. We need to find it. Mina nodded, understanding the urgency in his tone. Then we'll have to be careful. We can't trust Torgar completely, not yet. But whatever happens next, we need to find out everything we can. Lucas glanced back toward the cultists, who were still engaged in their hushed discussions. Torgar was speaking again, explaining more of the prophecy and what awaited them. He could feel the pull of something larger, something far more dangerous than any of them could comprehend. And for the first time, he felt the weight of his role as one of the Sent Ones. A weight that had nothing to do with destiny, but everything to do with what he had yet to discover.